The scream pierced the still morning air at exactly 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I watched it all unfold from my kitchen window. There was Karen Peaton, scrambling onto her imported marble picnic table, her designer heels slipping on the slick surface. All around her, at least a dozen wild hogs rooted through toppled trash bins. Their tusks gleamed in the early light, and her once pristine lawn looked like a battlefield. Above, 2 helicopters hovered as wildlife control officers in full protective gear moved in with tranquilizer guns. 3 hours later, Karen stood on her front porch in handcuffs, her mascara streaking down her face, while federal agents read her Miranda rights. The charge? A serious violation of the Protected Wildlife Corridor Act, an offense that could mean up to 5 years behind bars. But that's jumping ahead. To really understand what happened, we have to go back. I'm Marcus Chen, and I've been a resident of Willowbrook Estates for the past 12 years. Our neighborhood is an HOA-governed suburb on the edge of Pine Valley, right where new developments meet preserved wilderness. My home borders the Blackstone Wildlife Corridor, a 300-acre protected zone used by migrating wildlife, from deer to black bears. When I bought my house, the previous owner had already collaborated with the state's wildlife department to install a special protective barrier. Its purpose was clear: to keep dangerous animals like feral hogs and coyotes out of our neighborhood while still letting smaller creatures move through unimpeded. The fence wasn't pretty. It stood 8 feet high, built with reinforced steel posts spaced 6 feet apart, heavy wire mesh, and a concrete base sunk 3 feet underground. It looked more like a prison fence than something you'd expect in a suburban backyard, but it did its job perfectly. That barrier had prevented any wildlife incursions for 4 straight years. The state wildlife officials even used our setup as an example for other communities. I took my responsibilities seriously, inspecting it monthly and fixing anything that even hinted at a problem. And the HOA had always supported it, knowing that without it, their picture-perfect lawns would become hog-feeding grounds. Then came Karen Peaton. Karen swept into Willowbrook like a storm in designer activewear. Within 2 months, she charmed and pressured her way onto the HOA board. By month 3, she was president. Her platform? Beautify the neighborhood, raise property values, and enforce aesthetic uniformity. And my fence, according to her, was an eyesore that had to go. The first notice came on fancy letterhead with embossed gold trim. She addressed me as Mr. Chen, a formality that ignored the fact that I'd always introduced myself as Marcus. She cited several sections of the HOA guidelines and demanded I replace my fence within 30 days, offering a choice of white, beige, or forest green vinyl. I fired back immediately with a binder full of state documents, wildlife studies, official permits, and photos showing the destruction hogs had caused in nearby, unprotected communities. I included a letter from Dr. Patricia Williams, the state's lead wildlife biologist, backing the critical need for my barrier. I sent copies to every HOA board member and requested a formal discussion at the next meeting. Karen's reply arrived that same night at 11:37 p.m., a sarcastic email accusing me of using scare tactics to avoid compliance. She dismissed the threat of feral hogs as fantasy and declared the fence's removal inevitable. At the next HOA meeting, I made my case to a packed room. I presented visuals of hog damage, played testimonies from people who had been attacked, and even brought in Dr. Williams via video call to answer questions. The community seemed moved. But Karen sat at the front, arms crossed, rolling her eyes after every slide. When it came time to vote, she pulled a technical maneuver to indefinitely postpone the issue, insisting more research was needed before any decision could be made. 2 weeks later, I woke to the whine of saws outside. From my bedroom window, I saw 3 men in matching shirts cutting down my fence. Karen stood nearby, her pink tracksuit bright in the morning light, directing them with a smug air while tapping at her phone. I ran out in a fury, demanding they stop. Karen gave me a sugary smile and said the HOA board had held an emergency meeting and voted to take the fence down. When I asked to see documentation, she said the minutes were still being finalized and would be available in 7 to 10 business days. I called 911. The dispatcher said it was a civil matter. I contacted the state wildlife office, but it was the weekend. Even my lawyer could do little in the short term, other than advise me to record everything. So I did. I filmed every cut, every piece of fencing being hauled away. Karen posed proudly next to the damage like it was a photo shoot. By the time they were done, my barrier was gone. The yard lay exposed to the corridor. Karen waved on her way out, saying I should be grateful for the free yard renovation. That night, I installed motion cameras and stayed up, listening to strange sounds beyond the tree line. A day and a half later, it began. Karen's backyard was the first to suffer. Her expensive Japanese garden was torn apart. Miniature trees were ripped up. Her luxury koi pond? A mud hole. Next door, the Hendersons found their daughter's swing set twisted around a tree like it was made of rubber. The Patels' outdoor kitchen had been trashed. Their heavy grill was dragged across the lawn, its lid caved in. Then came the animals. Mrs. Rodriguez opened her back door and came face to face with 3 monstrous feral hogs. Their eyes glowed in the porch light. One of them charged, shattering her glass door. Her Yorkie barely made it back inside. The Choi family discovered a coyote den under their deck. 8-year-old Emma Washington was nearly attacked by a wild boar while playing in her yard. Her father had to scare it off with an air horn. By the third day, the neighborhood was in chaos. Animal control couldn't keep up. Pets were disappearing. People refused to go outside. Delivery drivers wouldn't enter. Children were kept home from school. The HOA's emergency hotline crashed under the volume of calls. All because one woman decided aesthetics mattered more than safety. The breaking point arrived when Robert Blackstone, the oldest resident in our community at 82, was rushed to the hospital after being attacked by a wild hog near his cherished rose garden. He'd gone out early that morning to check on his plants, only to startle a massive boar rummaging through his mulch. The animal charged, knocking him down and goring his leg before neighbors managed to chase it off with banging pots and pans. The image of Robert being loaded into an ambulance, his leg wrapped in blooded bandages, quickly spread through our community chat, igniting panic and outrage. That's when I made my move. I had meticulously documented every detail since Karen first took aim at my fence. Every message, every encounter, every recorded conversation. My security cameras had captured it all. The demolition of the fence, Karen on site directing the workers, even her telling them to make sure it was torn down thoroughly enough that I couldn't argue its necessity. There was footage of her laughing and posing for selfies next to the ruined structure, bragging about teaching me a lesson in HOA compliance. I compiled everything, the video evidence, the correspondence, the timestamps, into a single, irrefutable dossier. I sent it out to the state's wildlife authority, the county sheriff, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, multiple local news outlets, and every single household in Willowbrook Estates. The subject line of the email was blunt: "Why wild animals are terrorizing our neighborhood," with video proof. The response was immediate and intense. Within the hour, Dr. Williams from the State Wildlife Department called, shocked by what she'd seen. Sheriff's deputies began patrolling the neighborhood. Federal wildlife agents arrived to open an investigation, since the area Karen had interfered with was part of a protected wildlife corridor. By noon, news vans lined the entrance to Willowbrook. Residents who had been living in fear finally had answers, and they were furious. Unbelievably, Karen didn't back down. She fired off a mass email accusing me of orchestrating the entire animal invasion as revenge. She even alleged I had been leaving food out to attract dangerous wildlife and should be arrested for endangering the neighborhood. On top of that, she had the gall to fine me $500 for maintaining an attractive nuisance where the fence once stood. But her carefully constructed facade crumbled the very next morning. At 7 a.m., law enforcement arrived at her house, sheriff's deputies flanked by state and federal wildlife officials, all holding warrants. She was charged with multiple offenses: destruction of federally protected infrastructure, reckless endangerment, falsification of HOA records, and violating conservation laws. Investigators discovered that the emergency board meeting authorizing the fence's removal had never occurred. Karen had forged signatures and acted entirely on her own authority. To make matters worse for her, she had tipped off the press herself with yet another email tirade about corruption and conspiracies. 3 news crews caught her being led away in handcuffs, designer handbag swinging as she shrieked about property values and invoked her cousin the lawyer, who, she claimed, would sue the entire neighborhood. The federal agent reciting her rights didn't even flinch at her dramatics. The trial was exactly what Karen feared, and then some. Sharon Wallace, the no-nonsense federal prosecutor, laid out a devastating case. The jury watched damning surveillance footage, Karen ordering the fence's destruction, mocking the concept of ecology, laughing about her power in the neighborhood. Dr. Williams testified about the significance of wildlife barriers, showing graphic images of hog-related injuries. The contractor admitted Karen had presented fake documents and claimed everything was legal. Robert Blackstone testified remotely from rehab, his voice trembling as he recounted the terrifying morning he'd been attacked. When I was called to testify, I simply laid out the facts. I had kept records, followed the rules, and tried to warn Karen repeatedly. When asked if I had any previous conflict with her, I told the truth. I barely knew who she was before she targeted my fence for aesthetic reasons. Karen's defense unraveled completely. Her lawyer tried to argue that she'd only acted to uphold HOA standards, but the forged documents killed that narrative. When Karen took the stand, her entitlement came through loud and clear. She insisted she was preserving property values, dismissing the wildlife danger as exaggerated. Even as the jury saw photos of hog damage to her own lawn, she maintained it was all part of some vendetta against her as a strong woman in leadership. The jury didn't need long to decide, under 2 hours. They found her guilty on all counts. At sentencing 3 weeks later, Judge Harrison delivered a blistering rebuke. He condemned Karen's arrogance and self-interest, saying she had endangered an entire neighborhood out of vanity and an inflated sense of authority. Her complete lack of remorse and continued victim complex, he said, showed a dangerous detachment from reality. She was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, 3 years of probation, $50,000 in fines, and permanently barred from ever serving on an HOA board again. The look on her face was one of stunned disbelief. She turned to her lawyer, then scanned the courtroom, finding no support in the sea of neighbors who once tolerated her, now watching silently as the handcuffs clicked shut. Her wail echoed off the walls as she cried out that she had a leadership conference to attend and couldn't possibly go to prison. Not now, not her. But no one moved to stop the bailiff.